First contact with facts. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the crystalline walls of the Galactic Research Institute's main conference chamber, trying not to feel intimidated by the assembled collection of the universe's finest xenobiologists. Their varied forms, from crystalline structures to gaseous clouds contained in environmental suits, filled the tiered seating of the massive amphitheater. She was the first human researcher invited to present at the Institute's annual symposium on deadly species, and she could feel the skepticism radiating from her audience. Distinguished colleagues, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I come before you today to challenge our fundamental understanding of what constitutes a deadly species. The universal translator rendered her words in the 27 most common galactic languages simultaneously. From her position at the podium, she could see Chief Researcher Xylix-9, a towering being composed of living crystal, lean forward with interest. The movement caused rainbow refractions to dance across the chamber walls. Next to them, Dr. Merckx, a gas-based entity from the Horsehead Nebula, swirled their consciousness into what Sarah had learned was an expression of amused doubt. For centuries, Sarah continued, we've classified deadly species based on obvious physical characteristics: size, strength, natural weapons like claws or venom. But today, I present evidence that Earth's deadliest creature is neither large nor obviously dangerous. In fact, you might not even see it without magnification. A ripple of what could only be described as derisive laughter moved through the audience. Dr. Merckx's gaseous form swirled faster, their translator producing a sound like wind through crystal chimes. Dr. Chen, surely you jest. We've studied Earth's apex predators, your tigers, your great white sharks, your saltwater crocodiles. While fascinating, none approached the lethal efficiency of the crystal worms of Rigel 7 or the quantum predators of the Crab Nebula. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. With respect, Doctor, I'm not talking about any of those creatures. I'm here to discuss Culicidae, specifically Aedes aegypti, what humans call the mosquito. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated objections. A silicon-based life form in the front row actually began to crystallize in what Sarah recognized as their species' equivalent of hysterical laughter. Only Xylix-9 remained motionless, their crystalline structure scanning the data packet Sarah had submitted with her presentation proposal. Order. Xylix-9's harmonics cut through the chaos. Let us hear Dr. Chen's evidence. After all, Earth has proven unique in many ways. Sarah nodded gratefully and activated her holographic display. Above the chamber, a perfectly rendered mosquito rotated slowly, every detail magnified to show its sophisticated biological systems. This creature, weighing approximately 2.5 milligrams, kills an estimated 725,000 humans annually. That's more than all other animals combined. The silicon being who had been laughing stopped mid-crystallization. Dr. Merckx's gaseous form contracted in what might have been disbelief. Sarah watched as the universal translators worked overtime to convert the numbers into each species' preferred mathematical system. Impossible, came a voice from the back, belonging to a collective consciousness of bacterial colonies. No single species could achieve such numbers without being noticed, without causing planetary panic. That's exactly what makes them so deadly, Sarah countered, expanding the hologram to show the mosquito's proboscis in microscopic detail. They're everywhere, yet largely ignored. They transmit diseases like malaria, dengue fever, Zika virus, and yellow fever. Their ability to vector multiple pathogens makes them the perfect delivery system for deadly microorganisms. She advanced to the next slide, showing historical data. Before we understood germ theory, before we knew about viruses and bacteria, these tiny insects shaped human history. They've influenced the rise and fall of empires, determined the outcomes of wars, and continue to impact global health despite all our technological advances. The chamber had grown quiet now, the kind of silence that comes when deeply held beliefs begin to crack. Sarah could see various species processing the information in their own ways. some running calculations, others consulting their neural databases, a few beginning to show signs of what she hoped was understanding. Xylix 9's crystalline form shifted, creating a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Dr. Chen, you're suggesting that we've been approaching the classification of deadly species incorrectly all this time. Not incorrectly, Sarah corrected carefully, but perhaps too narrowly. On Earth, we've learned that true danger isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's not the predator you can see, but the one you barely notice. The mosquito succeeds not through strength or speed, but through numbers, persistence, and its role as a disease vector. She paused, letting her next words carry weight. And perhaps most importantly, it succeeds because we underestimated it for most of our history, just as this assembly was ready to dismiss it moments ago. The silicon being who had laughed earlier raised an appendage. But surely your species has developed defenses. With your technology, you must have ways to eliminate such a threat. Sarah's smile turned slightly grim. We've tried. For centuries. But these creatures adapt. They develop resistance to our pesticides. They breed in the smallest amounts of standing water. They thrive in our cities and our wilderness alike. In many ways, they're the perfect predator, too small to easily combat, too numerous to eliminate, and too well adapted to their role as disease vectors to completely defend against. The chamber erupted again, but this time with questions driven by genuine scientific curiosity rather than dismissal. Sarah noticed Dr. Merckx's gaseous form had taken on the deep blue color that indicated intense concentration, while several other species were already forming research subgroups to discuss the implications. As the session continued, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and amusement. She had come to challenge their preconceptions, but in doing so, she had also challenged the human tendency to equate size with threat. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important lessons come in the smallest packages. The invisible killer. The day following her initial presentation, Sarah found herself in the Institute's biocontainment laboratory, surrounded by some of the most sophisticated analytical equipment in the known galaxy. What had started as skepticism from her alien colleagues had evolved into intense scientific curiosity, though not all of it supportive. Fascinating primitive methodology, Dr. Merckx commented, their gaseous form swirling around a holographic display of historical human mosquito control efforts, spraying chemical compounds into the air and hoping for the best. How very Earth-like. Sarah adjusted the containment field around a preserved mosquito specimen. Sometimes the simplest solutions are born of necessity, she replied, keeping her voice neutral. We worked with what we had at the time. The lab itself was a marvel of xenotechnology. Quantum-locked chambers housed specimens from 1,000 worlds, each maintained in their perfect native environment. Sarah's small mosquito sample looked almost absurd next to the preserved tentacle of a Betelgeusian megapredator in the adjacent chamber. I've been analyzing your data on mosquito-borne diseases, Xylix 9 announced, their crystalline form refracting the lab's light in complex patterns. The mechanism is elegantly brutal in its simplicity. These insects act as living hyperdrives for pathogens, jumping from host to host with remarkable efficiency. A group of bacterial collective minds floated nearby in their containment spheres, their thoughts translated into audible frequencies. But the numbers still defy logic. How can such a small population? Small. Sarah interrupted, allowing herself a slight smile. She gestured to the lab's main holographic projector. Computer, display global mosquito population density map, Earth standard measurements. The air above them, filled with a three-dimensional representation of Earth, swirling with heat map overlays showing mosquito concentrations. The bacterial collectives pulsed with what might have been surprise. At any given moment, there are approximately 110 trillion mosquitoes on Earth, Sarah explained. That's roughly 16,000 mosquitoes for every human being. They've existed for over 100 million years, surviving multiple mass extinction events. While individually tiny, their collective biomass is staggering. Dr. Merckx's gaseous form condensed slightly, a sign of intense focus. But surely your species' technological advancement has provided solutions. The Rigelians eliminated their dominant predators within decades of achieving spaceflight. Sarah walked to another containment chamber, where live mosquito larvae swam in a small water sample. That's the fascinating part. Despite all our advances, complete elimination has proven impossible. They adapt too quickly, breed too rapidly, and are too integrated into Earth's ecosystems. Remove them entirely, and we risk ecological collapse. A perfect parasite. Xylix 9 mused, their crystalline structure humming with intellectual excitement. But you mentioned something intriguing in your initial presentation about their role in human history. Would you elaborate? Sarah activated another holographic display, this one showing historical battle maps and population movements. Consider the construction of the Panama Canal. Initial efforts by the French failed largely due to yellow fever and malaria, both transmitted by mosquitoes. Thousands died. It wasn't until we understood the mosquito's role that we could implement effective control measures. The lab's atmosphere shifted as various alien species processed this information through their unique sensory systems. Sarah continued, her voice gaining intensity. The Roman Empire's expansion was influenced by malaria-infested regions. Ancient armies were defeated not by enemy weapons, but by mosquito-borne diseases. These insects have shaped human migration patterns, population distributions, and even our genetic evolution. A silicon-based researcher who had been quietly observing finally spoke up. You're suggesting that these creatures have been one of the primary selective pressures on your species. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. Some human populations develop genetic resistance to malaria, like sickle cell trait in regions where the disease was prevalent. We've literally evolved in response to the threat they pose. The bacterial collectives pulsed with new frequencies. This raises significant questions about our classification systems for dangerous species. Perhaps we've been too focused on direct predation and not enough on ecological impact and disease vectors. That's precisely my point, Sarah said, walking back to the main display. Traditional metrics of deadliness, size, strength, obvious weapons, miss the subtle but potentially more significant threats. A creature doesn't need massive jaws or poisonous spines to reshape a planet's evolutionary history. Xylix 9 moved closer to the mosquito larva container, their crystalline form casting prismatic patterns across the specimen. Dr. Chen, would you be willing to participate in a more extensive study? The Institute has resources that could help analyze these creatures at a level beyond current Earth technology. Sarah felt a surge of excitement tempered with caution. What kind of study did you have in mind? We have quantum imaging technology that can track pathogen transmission in real time, at the molecular level. Combined with our temporal analysis chambers, Xylix 9's form sparkled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as enthusiasm. Dr. Merckx's gaseous form expanded slightly. Are you suggesting we use the Class 9 temporal scanner on an insect? Why not? Xylix 9 countered. If Dr. Chen's assertions are correct, understanding these creatures could revolutionize our approach to xenobiology and ecological threat assessment. Sarah looked around the lab, at the assembled alien scientists who had moved from dismissal to genuine scientific interest. She couldn't help but feel a sense of validation, though she knew the real work was just beginning. When do we start? A microscopic truth. The Institute's temporal analysis chamber was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. The massive spherical room was lined with quantum crystalline matrices that could slow down time itself, allowing for observation of events at the molecular level. As she carefully placed the mosquito sample into the chamber center, she couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Beginning molecular temporal scan, Xylix 9 announced, their crystalline form interfacing directly with the chamber's controls, reducing temporal flow to 1/billionth standard speed. The chamber hummed with energy as dozens of alien scientists observed from the surrounding gallery. Dr. Merckx had positioned their gaseous form near the main display, They're usually active particles moving with unusual stillness. Focus on the proboscis first, Sarah suggested, pointing to the mosquito's feeding apparatus. That's where the magic happens. The chamber's display suddenly expanded, showing the mosquito's proboscis in unprecedented detail. Sarah heard several alien species make their equivalent of gasping sounds as the full complexity of the feeding system became apparent. 6 needle-like mouthparts, she explained, working in perfect coordination. But watch what happens when we introduce a blood sample. At her signal, a drop of human blood was added to the chamber. In super slow motion, they watched as the mosquito's sophisticated feeding apparatus went to work. The proboscis didn't simply pierce the surface. It actively probed and searched, using specialized sensory organs to locate blood vessels. Remarkable mechanical efficiency, observed one of the silicon-based researchers. The proboscis actually secretes anticoagulants and vasodilators to facilitate blood flow. But that's not the truly fascinating part, Sarah said, her voice tight with excitement. Computer, introduced the Plasmodium sample. A specimen of the malaria-causing parasite was added to the simulation. In the ultra-slow temporal field, they could watch as the parasites move through the mosquito's system with terrible purpose. By all known laws of evolution, this shouldn't work, Dr. Merckx commented, their gaseous form swirling in agitation. The level of co-evolution required between parasite, vector, and host. Yet it does work, Sarah replied, with devastating efficiency. Computer, project historical infection patterns. The chamber filled with a time-lapse visualization showing the spread of malaria across human populations. In the slowed temporal field, they could see generations of both mosquitoes and parasites evolving, adapting, becoming more efficient at their deadly work. Stop, commanded Xylix 9 suddenly. Their crystalline form had taken on a deep, resonant frequency. Enhanced temporal resolution on genetic transfer events. The display zoomed in further, showing something that made even Sarah lean forward in surprise. In the space between mosquito cells and parasite, they could see something unexpected. That's impossible, one of the bacterial collectives pulsed. The genetic material. It's not just passing through. It's evolving in real time. Sarah finished, her voice barely a whisper. The mosquito isn't just a vector. It's an evolutionary accelerator. The chamber erupted in a chaos of scientific excitement. Various alien species began rapid-fire discussions in their native languages, overwhelming the universal translators. Sarah watched as Xylix 9's crystalline form vibrated with what she now recognized as profound scientific revelation. Dr. Chen, Xylix 9 said finally, their voice cutting through the chaos. I believe we may need to completely revise our understanding of biological warfare systems. Warfare? Sarah asked, puzzled. This is a natural process. Exactly, Dr. Merckx interjected, their gaseous form now a deep shade of intellectual excitement. Nature has created something more efficient than any engineered weapon system, a self-replicating, constantly evolving delivery mechanism for pathogens that can adapt to overcome almost any defense. The silicon-based researcher, who had been skeptical earlier, approached the display. The implications for planetary defense are staggering. Any species attempting to invade Earth would have to contend not just with human technology, but with countless microscopic enemies they can't even see. Sarah hadn't considered this aspect before. Is that why you're all so interested? For military applications. For understanding, Xylix 9 corrected. Your planet has developed one of the most sophisticated biological defense networks we've ever encountered. Not through technology, but through evolution. These mosquitoes and their pathogens form a planetary immune system of sorts. A deadly one. Sarah added grimly. One that kills hundreds of thousands of humans every year. Yet you survive, Dr. Merckx observed. More than survive. You've learned to study these creatures, to understand them, to develop countermeasures while maintaining ecological balance. Do you realize how remarkable that is? Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled alien scientists, now viewing Earth's tiniest predator with new respect and perhaps a touch of fear. She thought about how humans had lived alongside these deadly creatures for millennia, fighting them, studying them, learning from them. Computer, she said finally, show full Earth ecosystem interaction web, focusing on mosquito-related pathogen exchanges. The chamber filled with an intricate network of connections, a deadly dance of predator and prey at the microscopic level. As the alien scientists studied the display in reverent silence, Sarah couldn't help but feel a strange pride. Humans hadn't just survived this invisible war, they had learned to understand it, to fight it, and somehow to thrive despite it. In the quantum-slowed time of the chamber, a single mosquito beat its wings, sending ripples through the fabric of their understanding of life itself. Paradigm shift. Word of the temporal analysis chamber's revelations spread through the Galactic Research Institute like a virus through a population. Sarah found herself at the center of a scientific storm as researchers from across the galaxy requested access to her data and mosquito samples. The Institute's main conference room had been converted into an ongoing symposium, with holographic attendees from dozens of worlds joining the discussion. The implications are staggering. A quantum-based life form flickered from their position near the ceiling. Earth isn't just a planet. It's a testing ground for biological warfare systems that have been evolving for millions of years. Sarah stood at her now familiar position by the main display, watching as various alien species debated the significance of their discoveries. The room was divided between those who saw Earth as a potential threat and those who viewed it as a fascinating evolutionary laboratory. "You misunderstand," Xylix 9 interjected, their crystalline form casting rainbow patterns across the chamber. "Earth isn't a weapons testing ground. It's a crucible of adaptation." "Dr. Chen, would you show them the historical survival rates?" Sarah nodded, pulling up a new series of graphs. Human survival rates against mosquito-borne diseases have actually improved over time, despite the pathogens becoming more sophisticated. We've evolved alongside these threats, developing both biological and technological defenses. Dr. Merckx, who had become one of her strongest supporters, expanded their gaseous form to draw attention. "Consider the implications. While we've been engineering predator-proof environments and eliminating threats, humans have been learning to coexist with and adapt to them. Their entire medical science evolved in response to these challenges." "But the cost," a silicon-based researcher objected. "The annual death toll you cited is tragic," Sarah acknowledged. "But it's also pushed us to develop everything from genetic research to public health systems. Our understanding of epidemiology, immunology, and even genetic engineering was accelerated by our need to combat these threats." The room's holographic display shifted to show the complex web of human medical advances that had emerged from studying and fighting mosquito-borne diseases. Sarah watched as the alien scientists processed this information through their various sensory systems. "There's something else," she continued, "something we discovered just this morning in the temporal chamber." Computer, display the cellular adaptation rates. The air filled with new data streams showing how human cells responded to mosquito-transmitted pathogens. Our immune systems don't just fight these diseases, they learn from them. Each encounter makes us stronger, more adaptable. We're not just surviving, we're evolving in response to these challenges. A collective of bacterial minds pulsed with what might have been excitement. "Your species deliberately maintains this evolutionary pressure, even knowing the cost." "Not deliberately," Sarah corrected. "We work constantly to reduce mosquito-borne diseases, but we've learned that complete elimination could have unintended consequences. These insects are part of complex food webs, pollination systems, and even help regulate animal populations. The challenge isn't to destroy them, but to understand and manage them." "Management rather than elimination," Xylix 9 used, their crystalline structure humming thoughtfully. "A very Earth approach to the problem." The quantum being flickered again. "But surely with our combined technological resources we could." "Could what?" Dr. Merckx interrupted, their gaseous form swirling with intensity. replace millions of years of evolved biological interactions with engineered solutions. Look at what happened on Proxima b when they tried that. The room grew quiet. Everyone knew about the Proxima b disaster, where attempting to engineer out a seemingly harmful species had led to the collapse of entire ecosystems. Perhaps, Sarah suggested, pulling up new data, we're looking at this the wrong way. Instead of seeing Earth as unusually dangerous, consider it as unusually resilient. Our planet has developed complex systems of checks and balances, predator and prey, host and parasite. It's not about eliminating threats, it's about understanding them, adapting to them, and sometimes even learning from them. A holographic representative from the Andromeda Galaxy spoke up. You're suggesting we should study Earth's biological defense systems, not to replicate them, but to understand how they maintain equilibrium. Exactly, Sarah replied, feeling this surge of excitement. Think about it. Earth's mosquitoes and their pathogens have essentially created a planetary immune system, not one that eliminates threats, but one that forces constant adaptation and evolution. It's not perfect, but it's incredibly resilient. The room erupted in discussion again, but this time the tone was different. Instead of fear or dismissal, there was genuine curiosity. Sarah watched as various species formed research groups, proposing new studies and investigations. Dr. Chen, Xylix 9 said, approaching her position, the Institute would like to establish a permanent Earth Studies division, focusing on biological defense systems and evolutionary adaptation. Would you be interested in heading it? Sarah looked around the room at the assembled scientists, at the complex data streams showing Earth's intricate biological dance of survival, at the faces of beings who had gone from dismissing her world to studying it with fascination. On one condition, she replied with a smile. We focus not just on the threats, but on how life adapts to overcome them. Earth's story isn't just about danger, it's about resilience. The new understanding. 3 months after her initial presentation, Sarah stood in the Institute's newly established Earth Studies division, surrounded by research stations staffed by scientists from across the galaxy. The aunt's skeptical halls now buzzed with excitement as researchers studied everything from mosquito genetics to human immune responses. Remarkable progress on the genetic adaptation mapping, Dr. Merckx commented, their gaseous form shifting through shades of academic satisfaction as they reviewed the latest data. Who would have thought your planet's smallest predators would revolutionize our understanding of biological defense systems? Sarah watched as a team of silicon-based researchers used quantum imaging to track the real-time evolution of mosquito-borne pathogens. In another corner, bacterial collectives studied human immune responses at the molecular level. The entire division hummed with the energy of discovery. Latest findings from the temporal chamber, Xylix 9 announced, their crystalline form vibrating with excitement as they entered the lab. We've identified 47 previously unknown adaptation mechanisms in human cellular structures. Your species' ability to survive these microscopic threats isn't just impressive, it's unprecedented. And yet, Sarah added, pulling up a holographic display of global health data, we're still losing hundreds of thousands of lives every year to these diseases. That's why our work here is so important. The display showed the current projects underway, new methods for disease prevention, ecosystem management strategies, and studies of Earth's complex biological defense networks. But unlike the early days of the research, the focus wasn't on elimination. It was on understanding and adaptation. The Regellian Science Council has submitted a formal apology, Dr. Merckx mentioned, their form swirling with what might have been amusement. They've withdrawn their previous classification of Earth as a primitive biological system and are requesting permission to establish a research outpost. Sarah couldn't help but smile. How times change. 3 months ago, they wouldn't even acknowledge our data. Because we were looking for the wrong things, Xylix 9 observed, interfacing with the main research terminal. We expected danger to come in obvious forms. Large predators, visible threats. Your mosquitoes taught us that true resilience often develops in response to the threats we can barely see. The lab's main screen displayed their latest project, a comprehensive map of Earth's biological defense networks, showing how various species, from mosquitoes to microorganisms, created a complex system of checks and balances. It was beautiful in its complexity, terrible in its efficiency, and absolutely crucial to their planet's ecology. The Galactic Council has officially reclassified Earth, a quantum being announced, flickering into existence near the main display. It's now designated as a Class 1 biological research priority. They're particularly interested in how your species maintains technological advancement while coexisting with such sophisticated biological threats. That's just it, Sarah replied, walking to the temporal chamber where their original mosquito sample still floated in quantum suspension. We never had a choice. These creatures forced us to adapt, to innovate, to understand our world at the molecular level. Every advance in medicine, every breakthrough in genetics, every step forward in public health, they all came from our need to survive alongside these threats. Dr. Merckx moved closer to the chamber. And yet you never attempted to simply eliminate all mosquitoes, even when you developed the technology to do so. Because we learned the hard way that elimination isn't always the answer, Sarah explained. Sometimes understanding is more powerful than destruction. Sometimes adaptation is better than elimination. A lesson many species learned too late. Xylix 9 noted, their crystalline form reflecting the lab's lights in complex patterns. The Proxima b catastrophe, the Betelgeusian ecosystem collapse, all from trying to engineer away what they saw as threats. Sarah nodded, thinking about how far they'd come from that first dismissive presentation. The true measure of advancement isn't in eliminating challenges, she said, watching the mosquitoes suspended in time. It's in learning to understand them, adapt to them, and sometimes even benefit from them. The lab fell quiet as various species processed this through their unique sensory systems. In that moment of silence, Sarah felt a profound appreciation for her world's deadly complexity. Earth wasn't just a planet of predators and prey. It was a living laboratory of evolution, adaptation, and survival. Dr. Chen, Xylix 9 said finally, the Institute would like to expand the Earth Studies Division. We're receiving research requests from every corner of the galaxy. Species that once dismissed Earth as a primitive backwater are now fascinated by its biological sophistication. Sarah looked around at the assembled alien scientists, at the complex data streams showing the dance of predator and prey at every level from microscopic to global, at the faces of beings who had learned to see beauty in what they once feared. Well, she said with a smile, I suppose we should give them something worth studying. Computer, begin new research sequence. Project adaptation. Let's show the galaxy what we've learned from living alongside our planet's deadliest creatures. As the lab hummed to life with new purpose, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humans hadn't just survived in a world full of microscopic killers. They had learned to understand them, to study them, and ultimately, to grow stronger because of them. In the end, that might be humanity's greatest achievement, not conquering nature, but learning to dance with it, one molecular step at a time.